Hello, this is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
This is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Oliver Conway. This edition is published in the early hours of Sunday, the 30th of October. Nearly 150 people, many of them young women, have died during a crush in Halloween celebrations in the South Korean capital, Seoul. Russia says it is suspending global grain exports from Ukraine following a drone attack on Russian ships in occupied Crimea. And a famous politician in Haiti has been assassinated.
He's one of the most well-known politicians in the country, so it's really a big shock in Haiti to hear about that.
Also in the podcast, campaigning ends ahead of Brazil's closely contested presidential election. A new Zulu king is crowned in South Africa in the first such ceremony since apartheid. And
what's brilliant about the British legal system is that it's inherently theatrical. There are wigs and ceremony, and barristers are such brilliant orators as well. So I felt like everything I was reading, I was like, oh, this is just gold.
The footballers' wives' trial that just keeps on giving. Wagatha Christie, the play. But first to that tragic news in South Korea. It began as a Halloween night out in a vibrant part of the capital, Seoul. But it ended with nearly 150 people dead, most of them in their teens and 20s. They died when a crush developed in a narrow alley. It was the first big Halloween event since the COVID pandemic, and journalist Raphael Rashid told the BBC he sensed something wasn't right because of the large number of people in the area.
When I arrived towards 7 p.m, it was very clear that there was just so many people here, probably the most I've ever seen in Itaewon, and the crowds were just gathering more and more, and towards 10 p.m. or 10:30 p.m, it was clear that there were just far too many people and something was unravelling at that moment.
Many of the victims were trampled to death after the crowds surged. A further 150 people were injured. Emergency workers rushed to the area and could be seen desperately trying to resuscitate unconscious victims on the ground. BBC video journalist Hosu Lee described the scene.
What I saw was a lot of ambulances, a big thousands of crowds, still bodies covered in blue sheets. And there were a lot of medical staff, a lot of ambulances that were taking the bodies away one by one. There was a ton of crowd and a ton of police around them.
South Korea's president has ordered a task force to be set up to help treat the injured and launched an investigation into the cause of the crush. Many world leaders have expressed their condolences. Our correspondent Jean Mackenzie sent this report from Seoul.
Young people out to party, having fun, until things suddenly change. By the end of the night, bodies lined the street, some in costume. Others were carried into ambulances, lifeless and barefoot. The chilling sign of people who've tried to run but not been able to. The crush started in a small alleyway. It was so packed, people were stuck elbow to elbow. They had barely an inch to move when the crowd surged forward.
The incident happened as large numbers of people fell down during the Halloween festival, which caused serious injuries.
This area of Seoul is one of the most popular places for a night out, for locals and tourists. It's the place to celebrate Halloween, and it's estimated 100,000 had come tonight.
There's so many people to the point we were being crushed on the pavement, to the point where we had to spill onto the road where there were cars. No one really understood what was going on, but there were already several police cars at the scene in front of Itaewon Station and police standing on top of their police cars, desperately trying to tell people to leave the area as soon as possible.
Hundreds of ambulances and fire engines line the streets. Desperate people, alongside emergency workers, try to perform CPR. and there will likely be more as the injured are treated in hospital. Something has gone horrifically wrong here in Seoul tonight. Working out what is an important next step. But tonight, this city is numb, still trying to track down its lost.
Jean Mackenzie reporting from the South Korean capital, Seoul. It was one of the few signs of hope in the war in Ukraine, a deal allowing Ukrainian grain exports out through the Russian blockade of the Black Sea. Brokered by the UN and Turkey, the aim was to try to reduce global food shortages. But Russia has now announced it is halting its participation in the agreement after what it called a Ukrainian terror attack on the ships of its Black Sea fleet in Sevastopol in occupied Crimea. I got more details of the attack and the Russian response from our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams.
It's very unclear exactly what happened, but something substantial did happen in Sevastopol early in the morning. Russia says that there was an attack involving multiple aerial and maritime drones, but that it hadn't caused a great deal of damage and that all the drones had been destroyed. Various videos emerged during the day, which we've been working hard to try and verify, which appear to show quite a complex picture of drones, and particularly these unmanned small boats moving around the waters off Sevastopol, even inside the harbour, apparently at will. At a couple of moments, it does seem as though one of those boats is very, very close to and about to collide with a significant-sized Russian warship. We don't know whether that resulted in an explosion and what kind of damage that might have been caused by that. But it looks like a swarm of drones. And we've gotten used to the idea of drones in the sky. This is a swarm of drones on the water, combined with drones in the sky. Frankly, there are people observing this today saying they've never seen anything like this in the history of warfare. It appears to be an entirely new innovation, which we can only assume was carried out by Ukraine.
And Russia says, as a result, it can no longer provide security for these ships leaving Ukraine, carrying grain as part of this deal, and so it's going to pull out. But that deal was looking fragile anyway.
It was. And by the way, the Russians were never really responsible for providing security. I mean, the only thing that the international community wanted from the Russian Navy was to keep out of the way. So that's a slightly disingenuous line, to say the least. They're also saying that Ukrainian military used the safe channel created by that grain deal in July as a corridor through which to launch this attack. Well, that corridor is quite far to the west, so a rather unlikely allegation there. Also, that Britain somehow was intimately involved in carrying out this attack. Again, no proof, and the British Ministry of Defence has put out a pretty stern rebuttal of that. It's been clear that Russia's been unhappy with the grain deal for some time. Vladimir Putin has been railing against it, saying it's doing nothing to feed the world starving. It's purely lining the pockets of Ukraine and wealthy European nations. So he's been looking for some kind of way out of it. Russia is unhappy that a kind of parallel arrangement covering the export of Russian agricultural products, in particular fertilizer, has not been working as well as Russia would like. So it's been clear that they've been looking for a way out of a deal that was supposed to run for 120 days, hasn't come anywhere close to that yet. And now it seems we've reached that point.
Our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams. In recent weeks, Russia has been sending troops back into Belarus for the first time since the start of the invasion of Ukraine, when they launched an attack from there towards Kyiv. The new deployment has raised concern in Ukraine that a new northern front could be opened, involving Belarusian as well as Russian troops. The authoritarian leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, is thought to be under pressure from Vladimir Putin to increase his support, as our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford reports.
Вооруженные силы Украины обращаются к белорусскому народу.
This is a blunt warning from Ukraine to Belarus. Over images of planes and missiles, the voice warns Belarusians not to get dragged into the Ukraine war.
Запятнать кровью и смертью.
Your leaders are trying to stain you with blood and death, it says. But we'll respond with everything we've got. Valery Sakhashik is an ex-paratrooper commander turned political opponent of Lukashenko. But Valery says the Belarusian leader will resist as long as he can.
I
think Putin really wants Belarusian troops to go into Ukraine. But I think Lukashenko is more cunning and he'll do everything possible not to send troops. I think he knows Russia has lost this war, so why get involved on the losing side?
The Russian soldiers are already arriving. Ukraine has counted over 3,000 so far, and 3 times that number are expected. In a Defence Ministry video, a Russian soldier says he's come to help a brotherly nation. Of course, Belarus is already part of Putin's war. Russia fires missiles from its territory, and Russian tanks rolled across its border into Ukraine back in February. But Belarus sending its own soldiers to fight would be a whole new level. And it would be deeply unpopular. In Warsaw, I met Pavel Kuchta, who recruits volunteers to go and fight in Ukraine, but against Russia.
My sources in the Belarusian army say that 90% of the troops won't fight. They say the training is bad and the kit and morale are even worse than in the Russian army.
A new wave of protests against Lukashenko is the last thing Vladimir Putin needs now, when he's launched a war to stop Ukraine breaking free from Russia's grip. He won't want to lose Belarus in the process.
Sarah Rainsford, our Eastern Europe correspondent. Haiti has been described as a nation on the edge of collapse, with no functioning government and armed gangs holding sway in large parts of the capital, Port-au-Prince. Now, the violence has claimed another high-profile victim. A well-known politician, Eric Jean-Baptiste, has been killed in an apparent gang attack in the city. My colleague Julian Marshall heard more from Etienne Cote-Paluc, a Canadian journalist based in Haiti.
What we know is that he was going back to his home yesterday evening in his armed vehicle. There were shots that were fired and the vehicle was turned overhead. He was rushed to a hospital where his death was established by professionals. The bodyguard that was with him in the car also died during the incident.
Do we know whether this was a political assassination?
It's always hard to say, but one thing for sure is that in La Boule, where he was staying, there was gangs, at least criminal armed group that was there already and fighting since last year. And part of his families or close associates were involved in those fights. So it's probably linked in some ways. One of his nephew was kidnapped a few days ago, also from there. So this surely is something political around it.
And Eric Jean-Baptiste, was he well known in Haiti?
He's one of the most well-known politicians in the country. He was 3rd or 4th in the last presidential election. He really is someone that we used to hear on the radio, and he's commenting the news often. So it's really a big shock this morning in Haiti to hear about that. Added to that, the fact that well-known journalist got shot also on Tuesday in Port-au-Prince. He survived, but it was a similar attack when he was driving early in the morning.
I mean, whatever the motives of the killers, it's yet another indication, is it not, of how Haiti is descending into complete lawlessness?
It's surely an indication of that. It indicates also that the police really has forfeited some areas around Port-au-Prince. The police is outgunned in lots of different neighborhoods in Port-au-Prince right now, and people are really scared. Added to that, another gang is blocking the fuel entrance in the Port-au-Prince port. So it's really a dire situation right now.
And of course, Eric Jean-Baptiste has been very critical of the criminal gangs and this fuel blockade.
Yes, exactly. And he was really one of the more vocal voices about saying that this is really a dire situation and it needs to stop. He was saying a few days ago that everybody in Haiti knows that they're going to live only for the next 24 hours, that lives are short here in Haiti. He said that in a tweet a few days ago on Tuesday.
Journalist Etienne Cote-Paluc talking to Julian Marshall from Haiti. It is the first Zulu coronation in South Africa since 1971, when the country was still ruled by the racist apartheid regime. The new Zulu king, Msuzulu Ka Zwelithini, was crowned in a ceremony in the city of Durban. Many guests wore traditional dress, including leopard skin, colourful dresses and beads. Our correspondent Nomsa Maseko was watching.
Zulu warriors saluted King Msuzulu Ka Zwelithini shortly after he took his oath. The 48-year-old has now been officially recognized as the 9th king of the Zulu nation. This despite rifts within the Zulu royal family. Some of its members believe he's not the rightful heir to the throne. Those divisions have played out in public and in courtrooms. However, Prince Bambindlovu Zulu, the brother of the new king, believes his late parents, Queen Manfombi Dlamini Zulu and King Goodwill Zwelithini, would have been proud of this moment. King Miso Zulu acknowledged he had come to the throne at a difficult time.
I understand that history has chosen me when the Zulu and other nations are facing several challenges: poverty, unemployment, climate change, disasters, famine, disease, that do not only ravage our people but also our economies.
While many gathered here to celebrate with him, all eyes will be on him as he begins his reign. He doesn't have political power, but he has influence on the 11 million strong Zulu ethnic group. He's expected to play a role in helping to tackle some of South Africa's biggest social problems.
A report from South Africa by Nomsa Maseko. Still to come in the Global News podcast.
Put aside the wickedness. Today is the final day of the unrest. Do not come to the streets anymore. We will not leave you alone.
A threat to protesters in Iran from the head of the Revolutionary Guard. The two men fighting it out in Brazil's presidential election on Sunday have been scrambling to win over voters on the final day of campaigning. Polls suggest the former left-wing leader, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, is slightly ahead of his far-right rival, the current president, Jair Bolsonaro. But the deeply polarised race has become much closer than expected. Our South America correspondent, Katie Watson, has been following the campaign.
It's been an often bitter and personal campaign, and the final debate between Brazil's two candidates was no different. Much of the focus was on the country's economy, with 1 in 4 Brazilians struggling to eat every day. Jair Bolsonaro repeatedly called Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva a liar. In return, Lula accused Bolsonaro of dragging Brazil's reputation down.
If Brazil had a foreign policy, it is because we made it during the period I governed. In Lula's government, Brazil was an important international actor. In your government, what has Brazil become?
People here have a stark choice to make. Mr. Bolsonaro says he stands for family values, yet has been criticised for undermining democracy and behaving irresponsibly during the COVID pandemic. Brazil had the second highest death toll in the world. Or the leftist Lula, once the most popular politician in Brazil, then sentenced to jail for corruption. Charges that have since been annulled. Today, a march was held in Sao Paulo to try and bring people together. There are plenty who don't want either candidate. With less than 24 hours until Brazil chooses a new president, the country feels more divided than ever.
And that report by Katie Watson, our South America correspondent. Iranians around the world have been forming human chains to show their support for the anti-government protests at home. In Iran itself, demonstrations continued on Saturday, with videos showing protesters in the Kurdish town of Marivan starting fires on the streets and the security forces responding with gunfire. There are also reports of protests in at least one other city. Earlier, the head of the powerful Revolutionary Guards, Hossein Salami, issued this ultimatum to protesters.
Put aside the wickedness. Today is the final day of the unrest. Do not come to the streets anymore. We will not leave you alone. Know that we will take revenge.
The demonstrations have been going on across Iran since shortly after the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old woman arrested by the morality police on the 13th of September. Carmen Mohammadi is a British-Iranian author who left Iran with her family after the 1979 revolution. Caroline Wyatt asked her whether she thought the demonstrators would be put off by that warning.
No. Seeing how the last 6 weeks have played out, I feel like people have reached a kind of tipping point whereby they have really lost their fear to a very large extent. The way that the regime has responded to the protests, the brutality the utter horror with which they've not only shot people, but taken people into custody, and the reports that we're getting of the state of people's bodies, the fact that they don't even give back some bodies. I think that there have been so many horrors visited already on the Iranian population during these last 6 weeks that what else can they do? So no, I think people have got a massive momentum now, so I don't think it will make a difference.
Does that warning, though, scare you? Because you've got contacts, I assume friends and family, back in Iran. Do you worry about them?
Yeah, absolutely. It does. It scares me, and I'm sure it scares people there too. It's very difficult to get in touch with people there. Of course, they have been controlling the internet. I have friends and family in Kurdistan, and that's where really it's been particularly bad in the last week, because it was the services for the 40 days after Mahsa Jina Amini's death in Kurdistan, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people showed up. And I know that, the security forces are very busy right now in Kurdistan particularly. So I know that in the last week, I haven't been able to reach anybody there. And we just try and do our part here, show up to the solidarity demonstrations that there are, every weekend in London. We have something like 15,000, 20,000 people showing up.
I mean, how serious do you think that warning is? What are they actually implying they will do further?
Yeah, well, the blood runs cold. The IRGC is very well established in all aspects and sectors of Iranian life and society. They have a lot of resources. They have a lot of power. They're extremely ruthless. I can't imagine what else they can do, but certainly they can always ramp up the killings. They can ramp up the arrests.
British Iranian author Carmen Mohammadi. However desperate a mother might be to get home from a faraway country, few would go if it meant leaving their child behind. Yet that is the choice facing scores of foreign women married to Saudi Arabian men, even if their children were born and raised elsewhere. Dual nationality isn't recognised in Saudi Arabia, so a father who obtains Saudi citizenship for his children can stop their foreign mother taking them home. The US-based Human Rights Foundation says that of the nearly 50 American cases it's dealt with over the past year, none of the mothers involved is believed to have made it back with her children. Our Middle East regional editor Mike Thompson has this report.
It was a 30-day single-entry visit visa. He had promised that we would have no problems getting back home.
At first, all seemed to be going to plan for American mum Carly Morris and her 5-year-old daughter Tala after arriving in Saudi Arabia in August 2019. Her Saudi ex-husband, who she had married and later divorced while he was studying for several years in the US, had persuaded her to visit the country briefly so his family could meet his daughter. But he soon went about ensuring that this visit wouldn't be brief.
The week after we arrived, he asked for my passport and my birth certificate so that he could supposedly start processing her exit permit. But what he really did, and what I later found out, he transferred her to Saudi citizenship.
And that meant that she was now under his guardianship and not yours.
Right.
Carly says her Saudi ex-husband began collecting Tala each morning and returning her last thing at night, leaving her alone all day in a seedy hotel room, reliant on boxes of food he'd leave her. Finally, after nearly 2 years of trying to get her daughter home, she began writing to US congresspeople and others she hoped might help. That, she says, angered her former husband.
When he found out that I was reaching out to people outside of the kingdom asking for help, he abducted my daughter for a period of 2 months. He and his family fled their home even. During that time, he filed for custody of her.
In the papers filed as part of the custody proceedings, the father denied having abducted Tala.
President Biden has flown from Israel to Saudi Arabia. On his agenda now,
Carly had written to the White House for help. So when US President Joe Biden visited Saudi Arabia in July, her hopes soared. But that too came to nothing, as did, she insists, appeals to US embassy staff in Riyadh.
There tends to be a sentiment, even in the US government, of you did this to yourself, you should have known better. And so I feel like we face a wall a lot of times with that attitude.
Bethany Al-Haidri of the US-based Human Rights Foundation, who herself spent 2 years fighting to get her daughter out of Saudi Arabia, says this continues despite the ongoing plight of so many foreign mothers there.
It's very common. We documented in 2021 that there were 47 U.S. citizens, mother and children, that were trapped in Saudi Arabia. We have several Canadian citizens that we're working with right now through the Human Rights Foundation that are also trapped with their children. And I know as well several women from the UK facing these issues.
After a long court battle and several visits to the police, Carly was finally given custody of Tala, but told not to leave the Saudi city she's staying in, never mind the country.
At that point, I had gone 2 years, not even stepping outside. I sat inside of this hotel every single day. Like, not one person had seen my face. Not one person has knocked on my door.
And now she's facing yet another problem. Well before meeting her husband, Carly had converted to Islam, and she insists her beliefs have never wavered. But just days after she won back custody of her daughter, her ex-husband's father officially accused her of denouncing her faith and insulting Saudi Arabia and all Muslims, leaving her potentially facing a death sentence in this deeply religious country.
I know I was warned. Many people told me, do not enter that country. If you enter, you will never get your daughter back. And I didn't listen to the warnings. And I'm here in this situation 3 years later.
That report by Mike Thompson. The oldest prisoner at the American detention centre in Guantanamo Bay has been released and returned home. 75-year-old Saifullah Paracha was reunited with his family in Pakistan after more than 19 years in custody. He'd been held at the US base in Cuba since 2004 on suspicion of having links with al-Qaeda, but was never charged with a crime. The US authorities said he no longer represented a continuing threat. Mr. Paracha, a wealthy businessman, had been a legal resident of New York before his arrest. Clive Stafford Smith is his lawyer.
The moment he got out, he chose, bizarrely, to go and get tea at a McDonald's, and he's obviously very happy to be out. For the longest time, I've been worried that he's had 3 heart attacks, that the 4th was going to be fatal. And he's been cleared for release for well over a year. Because he lived in New York for so many years, he actually knows more about US culture than many of the guards. And he used to hum to me the Eagles song, Hotel California, where you can check out but you can never leave. And it's been an immensely depressing time for him. He wasn't arrested, he was kidnapped. The Pakistan government wouldn't turn him over because they said he was a businessman, not a terrorist. He indeed wrote to George W. Bush to try to help resolve the antipathy between the US and Islam, and has always been a force for peace in Guantanamo. The prisoners are political footballs, so these things are done. It's very hard to argue that Saifullah shouldn't be released at age 74 after 3 heart attacks. But there are 20 other prisoners, all of my clients, who should be released. I hope we're going to see them released in the near future.
Clive Stafford Smith. The Wagatha Christie libel trial was so named after the amateur sleuthing by Colleen Rooney, wife of the former England footballer Wayne. She conducted a sting operation to find out who was leaking stories from her private Instagram and blaming the account of Rebecca Vardy. Vardy, wife of another former England player, Jamie Vardy, sued Colleen Rooney for libel and lost. Now the story is being taken to the stage and tickets sold out within minutes. This report from Richard Hamilton.
On the 29th of July this year, global media attention focused on the High Court in London when the verdict was announced.
Oh, this is huge. I did warn you. Absolutely huge. The claim is dismissed.
We're hearing from the Press Association that Rebecca Vardy has lost that High Court libel case after Rooney...
The court has handed down the judgment in this libel action today. The claim has been dismissed. The defendant succeeded in establishing that the essence of the libel was substantially true.
For one night only, on the 15th of November, Vardy v Rooney, the Wagatha Christie trial, will be staged at the Wyndham Theatre. Its promotional material describes the production as a story stranger than fiction that blurs the boundaries of tabloid scoop, court case and soap opera. The playwright Liv Hennessy told the BBC why she was captivated by the case.
I mean, it's got all the ingredients of great drama, suspense, betrayal, mystery, fantastic characters. There was a lot more to this than just a private dispute between two women. It really seemed to speak to questions about trust on social media, what we expect of our public figures, and the conflation between private and public spheres.
The play will echo the format of a football match, with two halves of 45 minutes surrounding an interval. To produce just 90 minutes of theatre, Liv Hennessy had to wade through 7 days of verbatim court transcripts from the original trial.
What's brilliant about the British legal system is that it's inherently theatrical. There are wigs and ceremony, and barristers are such brilliant orators as well. So I felt like everything I was reading, I was like, oh, this is just gold. It was great. I also think that Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy are two very intelligent, confident women. And it was great to hear how they speak and how they communicate. And I think a lot of what people will hear might surprise them.
The play will be for one night only, but further performances are expected to be announced. Interest in the case was so intense that shortly after the verdict, Britain's Channel 4 announced it would be screening a 2-part television programme, Vardy v Rooney, a courtroom drama, also using court transcripts as well as media reports and analysis.
Richard Hamilton. And that is all from us for now, but the Global News podcast will be back very soon. This edition was mixed by Paul Mason, the producer was Emma Joseph, our editor is Karen Martin, I'm Oliver Conway. Until next time, goodbye.